Hello, I'm Robert Yule, and this is the 14th in my series on being a good steward of God's kingdom, based on Genesis 1:26. Today, I'm going to talk about how to get a project funded. Before we do that, I want to share what happened with the brilliant idea that I shared last week of geothermal energy. Let's use that when the sun doesn't shine. So, hope I surprise you a little bit. So, inception has to do with a new idea for someone, putting a new idea into someone. This is what I needed to do. And it needed to happen to me as well. So, how did it start? Well, after the rejection that I had mentioned last week, where they didn't like this brilliant idea, I nothing I could do about it. I'm just one person. I said my piece, I was done. But I went to a conference. It was a Christian conference, and the keynote speaker was releasing prophetic words now and then. And one of the words he released was, there are those of you in the audience today that God has given influence. You need to use that. Don't be afraid to use the influence that he's given you. Well, that landed on me, and I'm like, whoa, because this immediately was came to mind was I do have influence. I know a lot of people. I'm connected very well. Um, I can be silver-tongued and persuasive now and then. So I said, okay, God, I'll try, but for me to do this, I would need the support of my company. I can't do it as an individual. And so that was my simple test. We meet frequently to discuss these types of issues. It's called ESG, which is Environment, Safety, and Governance. And I was a senior member of that committee. So I took it to that committee and says, we could probably slightly improve our ESG score. Yeah, we get graded by a third party. Our customers and shareholders care about that. We could probably raise that score if we talked about advocating for good energy policy. And I gave them the great idea. And they said, it's a pretty interesting idea. Yeah, why don't we do that? And so they authorized me to speak in the name of the company. And they even gave me the chief of staff for the legal department as my partner because he had experience in lobbying work as well. So he and I were set off to go do this. And this is a case of being the right person at the right time. I was very familiar with steam plants. I had operated them for the first 10 years of my professional career. I was a nuclear submarine officer, and that's what a nuclear submarine uses as a steam plant. So I understood the technology. I certainly understood sustainability, and my partner, he understood lobbying and how to connect with people. And so we worked together on that. I also mentioned this to a young process engineer who had helped us on ESG projects. And so I just casually mentioned, hey, we're going to go do this. And she said, can I tag along? I'd like to learn more. I said, sure. Okay. So she tagged along with us. So we started contacting the key stakeholders in California that have anything to do with geothermal. We talked to the geothermal energy producers. We talked to the public utility. We talked to legislators' offices, not to the legislator, to their office, because it's the staff who make these proposals to the legislator if you really want to get it done. And we talked to the California Public Utility Commission. So those are the people we met with over the course of a couple months. All the meetings followed the basic same pattern. They would ask us, why are we meeting? What do you want from us? And they would end with, how can we help? The most challenging meeting was the first one. We met with a major geothermal energy provider, and they operate the big geothermal fields in Northern California called geysers. And they were intrigued by the idea, but they said, you don't understand. These steam plants are not designed to be shut down and started up every day. It's quite a bit of effort to turn one off and turn it back on. And when it's not running, we get water that starts to build up in the steam lines. We don't have a good way of getting that water out. And I said, no, I understand that completely. You need to automate your startup and shutdown procedures. And you need to retrofit your steam piping with a very simple device. It's called a steam trap. It lets the water out but keeps the steam inside. It's a steam trap. We use them on our nuclear submarines for the exact same reason. You don't want water droplets hitting your turbines. Bad things happen. Oh, yeah. So just, you need to have a list of what you need to do the conversion, but it's a brilliant idea. And they agreed it was. After the meeting, my bright young engineer, she was very excited. And she, of course, being an engineer, was trying to solve some of the technical issues that we discussed. And I said, whoa, 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 you need to stop. We're not going to solve this problem. This is not what we're doing. Do you remember the movie Inception? And she goes, well, yeah, I love that movie. And I says, that's what we're doing. We are planting an idea. And that got her even more excited because she suddenly realized we're just planting an idea. These people need to decide that they want to do this. This is their business. We met with legislators and they were very excited. And their questions were, what laws do we need to have changed? What support do these companies need to make this thing? What do we need to incentivize? What regulations do we need to modify to make it easier to do this? And so then I would meet with the public utility. This particular one is Pacific Gas and Electric. It's where the geysers field is. And they're like, why are you talking to me? Oh, well, I love this idea because they were responsible for trying to solve the duck curve. And they want to have dispatchable energy. But it says, I don't actually have anything to do with legislative affairs. Can I talk to that person? Yeah, I'll hook you up with them. And so I networked over there, talked to them. He says, well, we don't really propose legislation. We just comment on it when it goes through. And I said, perfect. So whenever you see any legislation making it easier to do geothermal when the sun doesn't shine, be very supportive. Oh, yeah, I can do that. That'd be awesome. Great idea. The last company I met with was a company that my advocacy group hooked me up with. They said, this is a startup. They're extremely well funded by a very major company to develop new geothermal. This geothermal did not use steam, it just used hot water, which really solves two huge problems. One, there's a lot of hot rock, but it's not hot enough to make steam. Again, think ring of fire around the Pacific Ocean. And two, when you make steam, you lose the water. A lot of it goes up into the air. They just needed the water to be hot, and then they put the warm water after they remove the heat back in the ground to heat it back up again. And so they have a closed loop system that is very water low usage, which is perfect for places like California. And I talked to them and they loved the idea. And I said, so the legislators want to know, what do you need? And so the senior VP I was talking to, she turns to her legislative assistant and says, so do you know how to draft the legislation we need? And she goes, no, I don't know who these people are. I just read the register and make a report on summary report. That senior VP, I think, suddenly realized she had a weatherman, not a rainmaker. She needed a rainmaker. I could see it in her eyes. I don't know if she would have fired that poor woman who was only the weather reporter, but she was serious and focused on this issue. So, what was the results? Well, the first one happened right away. Within a week or two, that company changed their banner ad on their website to geothermal baseload when the sun doesn't shine. Oh yeah, they got the message. They now knew what they were doing. And back in October 2024, the state signed out legislation that removed the environmental permitting for geothermal from the state agency that was doing it to the local counties. And it was very clear. They stated why they did that. The state agency was understaffed, ill-equipped, backlogged, not able to handle the technical issues associated with this. Counties, on the other hand, especially those that have a lot of hot rock, they're well funded, they're very skilled and organized, and they are ready to go. And there was much rejoicing in the geothermal world because this opened the floodgates to getting geothermal into the ground and making electricity. So that's what happened with that brilliant idea. We did a little inception on it. I do want to talk about how to get things funded. I was at a conference just doing a case review and sharing how we had saved energy, much like what I've shared with you guys. And I stopped in the middle of it and said, by the way, I've talked to some of you and you seem really frustrated. You don't know how to get your projects funded. And I said, your problem is you don't know how to speak to your chief financial officers. You guys keep trying to sell your projects based on payback. It has a 1 year payback, a 5 year payback, whatever it might be. And the chief financial officer understands that, but he doesn't care. You don't know what a chief financial officer wants, and therefore you have trouble getting your projects funded. So, how do you get there so you can get your projects funded? First is you need to know who budget owners are. There are actually very few budget owners in most companies. These are people who submit budgets and have the authority to move money around in the budget once it's been approved. I happen to have been a budget owner. I've worked my way up to that level by being a good steward. You need to know how budgets are built. There is a window where they start to build the budget. If you have a good idea that you want to get funded, you need to make sure it's on the list of things they're considering that week that they start to build the budget. Because it's really hard to add something after the process starts. It's really easy to add it at the beginning of the process. You need to know how to build a budget and when to do it. You need to know the financial goals of the organization. This was the problem most project managers and facility managers had. They didn't understand the chief financial officer, he lives or she lives and dies by profit. That's what the shareholders want. That's what they're responsible for. Earnings per share. These are the things that motivate and excite the CFO. And so I might tell them what the payback is, but I also tell them how it's going to result in more profit and how much more profit they'll see each year if we do this project. That really gets them interested. They like profit. You need to know their languages. So if they say something like EBITDA to you, your eyes don't roll up. You know what that is, basically. And if you're curious, it's interest, earnings before interest, taxes, and amortization. Most people have no idea what amortization is. You can look it up. You probably still won't know what it is if you do look it up. What's gross margin? What's net operating margin? Those sort of issues. And if there's anything weird or special about your organization's finances, that's commercial. If you're in a public institution, it has similar things. My observation in the public sector, believe it or not, is they're heavily motivated to spend money. They live in it, spend it or lose it. If they don't spend their budget, they get less money next year. And so they like to have projects available to them that they can fund at the last part of the year so that they make sure they commit all of their budget. And you want to be on that list of things to get funded. Another key is developing relationships. Be helpful to other people is a great way to do that. I've already talked about the power of that. So be helpful in your company. Be someone that is recognized. If you need some help, I'll stop what I'm doing and give you some help. And of course, I was a facility manager. If the CFO's toilet is backed up, we make sure he gets good service. And I'll let him personally know that, yeah, we got it taken care of. Thanks for letting me know. Another important aspect of getting a project funded is offer alternatives. People like choice. And so you can give them, here's an option A, here's the benefits, here's the downsides, here's option B, here's its benefits, here's its downside. Which do you prefer? And you'll find that they like that. I didn't put this one on the list. This is one to avoid. Never say you have to decide right away. When you say that you have to decide right away, any well-trained financial manager has only one response. Because when they hear that, what you have just said to them is, please say no. And they will. Nope, not doing it. If it needs to be decided right away, it's not worth doing. Urgency is a bad thing to try and sell something with. It's called the hard sell. And any experienced senior manager, especially a financial one, they've been tricked and fooled way too many times. So don't do that. Well, I hope this has helped. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Until then, please be a good steward.